maybe while we're waiting, just a question. If we should happen to have a very small group, is it of value to you to have the recording that you can send around? So let's just go ahead and do it.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. I'm surprised. Matter of fact, I'm half wondering if there's a technology glitch somewhere. Um,
Oh, well.
because I'm not seeing any. My phone is not blowing up, nor is my email. But when you typically have that many people registered, oh, here comes another one. Okay, so oh, they're coming.
It is
Uh,
December 15th, so
I
you
know.
never
We
know.
knew
Maybe
that.
it said 6:30 somewhere. I don't know.
It did say
Okay.
6:30. So 6:30
Oh,
should
I
be
thought
the
it was 6. That's
Mhm.
why I came on when I did. I thought it was 6. Yeah, I have written down that was 6. Oh well.
uh, welcome to the world. I know. Okay. We'll get started in just a minute,
Okay.
people.
Yeah. Welcome everybody. If you're just joining us, if you would take a moment and put your name, your county, and your role, whether you're a trustee or staff or superintendent, in the chat, that would greatly help us. All right, David, I'm going to go ahead and get started so you have the most of your time. I'd like to welcome everybody for attending today's um, special session on charter school renewals and appeals for county board trustees. We have a great program tonight, um, uh, brought to you by the CCAP group. I want to talk very briefly here about ACCBE. We are uh, association by county, for county boards by county boards. Our mission is to empower county board members to be confident advocates for all students. In this particular education, as well as the rest of the education we do, are in support of that mission. And our vision is that as the leading voice for California County Boards of Education, we improve outcomes for students, families, and communities at large. We have 4 pillars that our work is around, and tonight's session falls under the third one that you'll see there about engaging, elevating, and empowering our membership. We also, our advocacy committee has just kicked off for the 2026 legislative year. And in fact, one of our speakers tonight, David Patterson, chairs that committee. We're also doing a lot of work with partnerships with others, groups such as the um, Small School Boards Association, California Superintendents, and we're looking to grow that network with other allied groups that are supporting education and in particular the At Promise youth that we serve. And with that, I am going to turn it over to our speakers tonight, and then we'll have a few follow-up questions at the end and a short survey to take. So with that, David, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. And Tom, you're working on bringing it up as Tom brings it up. Let me also say tonight I get to wear 2 hats. Let me first start with my hat as a member and the vice president for ACCBE. I also want to thank you for joining us tonight. Like all ACCB trainings and webinars, tonight's training is in response to requests from county board members across the state. A large majority of County Office of Education either authorize charter schools or have a role in hearing charter school appeals. Under the law, trustees have a legal and fiduciary responsibility to understand their statutory role in these processes. But also, let me be clear. Ensuring that county trustees are well informed about the renewal standards, appeals, and oversight responsibilities is not a pro or a con position regarding charter schools. It is fundamentally our governance due diligence obligation under the law. Similar trainings have been long offered by the former CCBE, including many that CCAP provided in the past. Next, first slide. Next slide, Tom. Okay. Introductions of the presenters. So here's where I change hats. Well, first, let me note that Joe Hendricks, who is a deputy superintendent for the Sutter County Office of Education, is ill. He's not going to make it tonight. You already have an opportunity to be introduced to me in my CCAP, my ACCB role, but I also serve as the president of CCAP's board of directors. And then I also want to introduce Tom Hutton, who is our executive director. And with that, I will turn it to Tom.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We're very pleased to be able to do this in partnership with what we at CCAP call Dave's new organization. Although we know he's one of many of a team of folks that have put ACCBE together. So just for those of you who are unfamiliar with CCAP, uh, Dave is actually apparently he's a serial founder because he also is a founder of CCAP going back to his days as an authorizer. When in 2013 there were a group of district or county authorizers that kind of looked around and were all feeling very isolated and lonely, and realized that they really needed to network together to improve their practice as authorizers for the benefit of all students in our state. So the mission of CCAP is to support districts and counties, the staffs and boards, as the trustees as well, with their role as authorizers of charter schools. And we like to tell everybody in our state, the politics, as you know, sitting in the hot seat of charters in our state can be sometimes tempestuous, and our mantra is you can love them or you can hate them, but the oversight needs to be good. And so that's kind of where CCAP is coming from. We play it straight down the middle on oversight. We provide training statewide. We provide a lot of plug and play toolkits for authorizers, online resources. We'll point you to some of those, although obviously they tend to be more at the staff level than at the trustee level, but we'll point you to where those things can be found. And we hold what we believe is a really good annual statewide authorizer conference in June. We are funded by a variety of things, but we also have been very grateful to the federal government, the charter school program. We have been the recipient of, we're now in our third multi-year, multi-million dollar grant from the federal government to improve authorizing practice. We have been doing that in partnership with some other states, mostly Colorado and Florida, because if you add up our three states, we have a huge proportion of both the authorizers and the charter schools in the whole country. So it makes a pretty compelling application when we tell the feds you can support better, higher quality authorizing by supporting us because we have that kind of a reach. And for those who are or are not familiar with CASI, the Charter Authorized Support Initiative, is the CDE's initiative. They also are partly federal funded for it to support authorizing practice. And CCAP has been a participant in that effort. So those of you who are familiar with CASI and the charter chats and everything, you may be familiar with CCAP as well through that group. I just repeat, if they're late joiners, Debbie's request was that if you could rename yourself, find the little ellipsis in the corner of your Hollywood square and add your county and your role just so we know who's who. That's fun for people getting to know one another and for us to sort of, when we get to questions and discussion, we can sort of see who's who. So this is the plan for today. It's a short, we're painting in broad strokes. We're not going to bury you in every little minutia of ed code about this or that procedural thing, but we wanted to provide the big strokes for trustees about the world of renewals that we are now back in the thick of after several years of hiatus. Some suggestions of some things that you can be doing at the trustee level and that your staff can be doing to make sure you're ready. You may have already been in this process. We know that there are renewals and appeals of district denials that have come your way already, but we'll start at the beginning and walk through the basics for just renewals in general and then the particulars for those of you in counties. So the first kind of big area we're talking is just making sure our board is ready for this. I already alluded to, the politics can be polarized and we are a declining enrollment state. So there are some tensions that come of that. And yet we're, I think, beyond the point in California where the debate is, should we have charters? I mean, they're here to stay. They're at something like 12% of our public school students. So they're a big part of our education ecosystem. And renewals is a big part of that because the charters have, a term to do their job and prove that they're doing the job. And then it's up to the authorizer to determine whether that's been happening effectively and whether they go on to a second term. This chart, we should probably update because it's now we're in the middle year. We could push it out one more year, but this gives you kind of the overview of the sheer count that we're talking about of renewals because of that hiatus, which puts renewals down the road while we recovered from COVID and had data available to be the basis of some of the evaluation of their performance for renewal purposes. This is what the landscape looks like in terms of the crunch of renewals. And both those rows are relevant to you in the counties because not only do you have the renewals of the schools that you authorize in your own right, but in the case of a district denial, that there may or may not be an appeal to you from that decision. So counties have to sort of have a two-track radar to see what might be coming down the pike. So the first big question that we put up there for counties is what's the renewal schedule for our own schools? And relative to that, with AB 1505, which passed right before COVID kind of shut everything down for a while, the state changed the system for renewals and they put in place a system that places the schools that are not DAS schools into one of three performance tiers for purposes of considering their renewal. So you don't find yourself in a tier if you are a DAS school. There's a different set of things for that, and we'll talk about that. But all the other schools, based on their dashboard performance, find themselves in one of three tiers. And the highest tier, which is often associated with a green color, presumes that the school will be renewed. There are exceptions. If there are things, even if academically they're doing well, but they're having some, let's say they're in financial free fall or there's some scandal or they aren't serving all students, that can be the grounds for denial, even of a high performing academic school. Then there's the other end of the spectrum. There's a lower tier that says, presumptively, this is going to be a non-renewal, but there's still even there some wiggle room for an authorizer to take a second close look and say, we think that this school, while they are in this tier, are making the right kind of decisions or the right circumstances are there where we think they can turn it around. And based on that, we're going to give them another couple of years to see if they can turn it around. But the preponderance of our schools that are not DAS schools find themselves in the middle tier. And that's where there's a full review and the authorizer has some discretion in terms of denial or approval. And then if so, what kind of term we're looking at. So besides, I mentioned before, besides your own schools, you want to have a sense of radar of what's going on in the districts in your county. What's that count? If you applied that chart that I shared with you to your own county, what would the breakdown look like for when renewals are coming to your districts? And any thoughts or any information you can get on what tiers those schools are in terms of what's likely to come your way by way of appeal. And again, that one, the real one to have your radar attuned to is what schools are in any potential real danger of denial based on their academic performance or if there's something else going on there that people are aware of in the community that might cause some peril because it's those denials that are going to be the basis of any appeal that comes your way. So we have a larger renewal toolkit that should come out next month. But what would the resource that we have created that helps people just with this big picture, like, hey, what's coming down the pike and where are things? We put together a resource that's available here that maps out those questions that I just asked, like what are the schools? And gives you fields you can plug in. What are the schools? What tier are they in? Where's the link to the CDE database that tells me that? And so it puts it all in one place. It makes it a quick planning document to kind of map out what you think might be coming your way. Again, it's more for a staff tool, but it's pretty broad strokes for those of you who might want to take a look or maybe point your staff to it and say, this would be an easy, quick reference for us if we wanted to take a look at it. And then next month, and I'll point you at the end to where you can find all of CCAP's resources. We're going to have a more robust tool that we'll be rolling out. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave. Don't worry, we'll stop along the way for questions. And if some question comes up along the way, we're a small enough group, raise your hand or put it in the chat. And we're such a small group, unless a whole lot of people joined since I started, that if you feel like you want to just pipe up verbally, that's okay too. But for now, I'm handing the baton over to Dave.
Thank you, Tom. And I'll reiterate, we're a small group. We do have a Q&A period coming up, but as we go. Now it switches a little bit to what else does our board, your board, my board, Placer County need to do to be fully prepared? And so here's some thoughts that you might not have thought about, which is, let's start with, do you have an up-to-date board policy for charter school renewals and appeals? A lot has changed. If your board policy is 4 or 5 years old, it needs some update. Uh, Placer County right now, I sit on the policy committee for our county board, and we've been working with staff for the last 3 months on updating ours. And well, right now, our current version is in some of that toolkit stuff you have, but it's a bit of work because a number of changes happened with 1505. So first thing is, you might want to check on that. Second, does your board, if you haven't done a renewal recently, if you didn't have that opportunity to say, oh, we need a refresher because it's been 3 years or 2 years, think about, do you in fact need a refresher on charter school law and the renewal criteria? Because we deal with a lot of stuff, and if you haven't dealt with it for a while, you need to be regrounded into what the criteria is and have the conversations that you want so that you as a board and you as an individual board member are comfortable. Okay, I understand the law, I understand my role, and then you also want, for the same thing, a clarity on the board and board members' role in the renewal process. At some boards, that when a charter comes to them for renewal, individual board members or a group of board members do visits. They have a separate subcommittee. Others do not. Uh, so it varies a great deal across the state. The issue for all of us, all of you, is in fact figuring out ahead of time, what's our protocol? How do we wish to do it and why? And then to make sure that we make sure others are aware of it, so people know what the rules of the game are, and they can in fact, oh, this is an opportunity to provide input. How do I do it and where do I do it? So it's an issue of clarity about how your board works in that process. And equally important is, well, what staff could have used for their process, and that's again where that reference piece for a blueprint of how to handle it is often helpful. But if your staff hasn't had a chance to think about it, this will prompt that opportunity. So it's important that there's a process in place. It can be renewals can be complicated. They are complicated. There's a lot of pieces to it. And so it also is an additional workload on your staff that is frankly on top of everything else that you have. So it's important for them to have the opportunity to pre-plan and for you to have an idea of how your input will happen, what the process will be, where you enter into the process or not. And then I suggest also you should think about a schedule or a calendar so that you as a board, because you have your own work and you have your own issues that come forward that are beyond this. And it's good to know that you're going to have one or maybe two renewals during these months, and because it will impact your time as a board, and it may require you to do extra work. It clearly will be do extra reading and other stuff, and it may mean an extra meeting or two as you go through that process. Next slide, Tom.
Let me just chime in real quick before I do that, Dave. I just wanted to give a quick shout out to the Contra Costa County Board. Sarah Butler is with us, and her staff actually did the refresher session that Dave mentioned. They actually brought CCAP in to be part of that. And I think in an ideal world, the advantage of the way they did it is they did the refresher session when there was not a renewal imminent. It was take a look. Let's have this conversation when it's not everything we're talking about isn't colored by the awareness of a particular school in mind. That's an ideal way to do it if you can get your schedule planned that way. So here we go, Dave, for your next one.
Okay. Then we also have a unique set of circumstances because we're a county board. And as you know, part of the work of ACCB is to help us with the governance structure, the shared governance, because the role of the county superintendent and the role of the county board are different, but they work together. And so uh, cooperation and collaboration are frankly essential. County board members are elected officials. There's a few exceptions there, yeah, but you know, we'll put our friends at Waco aside, and county superintendents of schools overwhelmingly, but not all, are also elected. Um, the the clear piece here is that boards have the legal responsibility to approve or deny a charter or a charter renewal. Superintendents have direct responsibility for the oversight of county office of staff. And typically, they're asked and do the oversight for charter schools approved by the board. And in that area, the staff often have greater expertise, and they certainly go to a much greater level of detail than the board on a day-to-day basis. So I think that those are important distinctions that we have as a county board and a county superintendent. Next slide, please. Now, in addition to the special relationship between the county superintendent and a county board, we also have a special role as a county board. Like we do in other areas, we have a role where we adjudicate. In this case, we adjudicate for appeals on interdistrict transfers, on expulsions. But we also have that same role for charters. And so we handle appeals of a denial of a petition itself or the renewal petition. And typically it's going to come from a school district to the county office of education. We also remember that it's possible that when we act on a petition or renewal and the board does not approve it, it also has the opportunity to go to the State Board of Education. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Now, with the exception of a countywide. A countywide has no appeal rights. Now, the County Office of Education is now the final substantive appeal level. Under 1505, the state board is no longer doing de novo reviews. They actually are just doing a review to make sure due process was provided, that there wasn't an abuse there of discretion. And that's a very big difference than the role before. In an appeal, the district has an obligation to provide the documentation. What were their findings of fact? What was the language that the board adopted with their denial? They have an opportunity to speak, to provide public comment. So they clearly have a role in this process. Now, the County Office of Education, it's really clear, is we're not making a judgment on the district's decision. We have the obligation to do a de novo review, which just means a fresh look. So the board, the underlying district can do all their work and all that, but we also have an obligation to do our work separately. And that can often be a difficult role for the board and for the staff, because the analysis might be different. Like you are on an interdistrict appeal, there are times where your decision might be different than the district. So we need to recognize that both the interpersonal and the challenge, because we're also colleagues and we work together all the time. Next slide, please. This is where we stop and do some questions and answers about what we've covered so far. So who's the first? And if we don't have anything in the chat, I'm going to ask that somebody if you have a question, just unmute and start talking. Ask your question.
I got a
Actually,
question.
Oh, great. Here we go.
Okay, on the renewals, are you required to do a staff report? Is my question. And I can tell you why I'm asking. Or is that depend on the level or what?
It is, if you are going to deny a petition or a renewal, you clearly have to have findings of fact. I would also suggest you need findings of fact to approve. because the law talks about that. So yes, it would be um, if you if you don't, that puts you in a very precarious legal position that makes everybody crazy. Both if you don't have that when you act, but it's also equally true when an underlying district doesn't do it. It complicates the work of the county board significantly because because you don't have those actions before. Um, and with all I'm saying is when you run into situations like this that are a little bit, I'm also assuming that you're going to your legal counsel and getting her or his advice on anything that seems weird or different or out of the ordinary.
Yeah, that point is super important, particularly if there's any if you view it like there's a potential for some contention. Maybe it's the outcome of the renewal is not clear, and you just want to make sure your hand is held carefully. Um, the other thing is, different boards handle how they want their staff to advise them differently. Some say, come to us with the recommendation, approve or deny. Others say, give us the pros and cons of either scenario and we'll figure it out ourselves. And the trick is that if you have a recommendation from your staff that maps everything out in great detail and you say, okay, we're going with this recommendation, well, there's your written record. If you depart from the staff report, then you got to make sure that the record is reflected for what was the basis of that so that you have that. And the other thing, we'll talk about appeals later, but again, because at the state board level, they're reviewing your procedures and making sure that everything was handled fairly. So they also will need a record if it should go beyond you to an appeal to the board.
And let me add a little bit to that also. Some of you might be aware that I served as the head of the charter school oversight office at the Alameda County Office of Education. That board uh, wasn't looking for a staff recommendation. What they were looking for is a full summary of the strengths and challenges to any petition we reviewed, which then they could use as a basis for uh, a denial if they wished, but they also could use it as a basis for an approval and then probably a conversation about follow up or conditions of the approval. So some boards want that. Alameda County Board wanted to have all the info, but then they also wanted to have the opportunity to deal with it themselves and not rely on a recommendation from the staff. For Placer County, we have a different stance. We asked for the county superintendent to provide us with a recommendation as well as the full analysis of strengths and possible challenges. Other questions? Don't be shy. Sarah opened the door for us all. Okay. Well, we will have other opportunity. Tom, I believe I pass it back to you.
All right. Well, this is the next big picture question. Well, what do we need to know about all this? And again, we're not going to go into granular detail on every procedural thing, but we wanted to provide enough of the context so that you come away with the awareness of, well, these are things we need to make sure we're on top of. These are things I need to ask the staff about just to make sure. But we're going to actually first we're going to pull the lens back a little bit because we dove right into renewals and we want to place them sort of in the context of the overall what we call the life cycle of a charter school. And this kind of is a schematic that kind of maps it out, going all the way from the approval of the petition and what we call year zero. That's that year where they're getting ready. They're not serving kids yet, but they're getting everything ready because they have the approval in hand. And the rhetorical question we always ask audiences like this, and they always guess the answer correctly, and that is, when does the renewal process begin? And it actually is the day the petition is approved. Because you want to be mapping out your activities as an authorizer, and in your case, an authorizing body, so that you're continually coming back to the reference of, well, where are we in this process that's going to eventually lead to a renewal discussion. So, for example, this is not required by Ed Code, but it's a recommended best practice and one that we've done a lot of work on CCAP. You know, the first time you ever revisit a charter school that you've approved should not be in its renewal year in your renewal discussion. Hopefully, along the way, you've had check-ins, you've had an annual report that sort of references the renewal trajectory that the school is on, flags some things that are going well, some things that maybe they want to give some attention to. So that gives you an opportunity as a trustee to be a little bit more familiar with the schools as you go along. And Dave will talk about relationships later. But this sort of maps out, and we'll share the slides out, I'm sure, later, but maps out some of the things that happen in the different years. This should be updated for the fact that for high performing schools in that higher tier, there's a potential for a 7 year renewal term at this point. But this is one way of sort of mapping out the life cycle. This is another way that we've stolen from the National Charter Schools Institute. The rest of the world calls petitions applications. And so you see this sort of, it starts with the application down in the lower left. You get the authorization in that year zero I talked about. And then the bulk of the work is in that big arc that goes around where you're just monitoring the performance, you're doing the oversight of how things are going, and that culminates in this reauthorization process. And either as a result of that, the other thing is other states say reauthorization versus renewal, but the result of that renewal process, in theory, could be closure, or if just something kind of catastrophic happens along before you get to that renewal year, there's a potential for a charter closure there too. But that just sort of maps out where the renewal falls in the life cycle of the school. So also pulling the lens back and looking at the big picture stuff, these 4 essential questions are ones that CCAP put out in a white paper where we said, charter authorizing is due for a bit of a reboot in California. And we think that there's 4 fundamental questions that every authorizer ought to be able to answer. And honestly, we use the same questions when we talk to school board governing, to charter school governing board members and charter school leaders is, can you answer these 4 questions and what would your short answer be? And for each of those, the follow-up question is, how do you know? So is the educational program a success fundamentally? Is it financially viable? There's a sub-purpose with that we now talk about in terms of, because it's much in the news lately, which is not just viability, but sort of like internal controls and the sort of safeguarding the public fisc in addition to just the viability. Is the charter school operating and governed effectively? And that includes legal compliance and other things. And then the 4th question is sort of added by more recent legislation where they've focused on, well, when we talked about that renewal criterion being, is the school serving all students that want to attend, you could have a very successful school academically and financially, and that's checking all the boxes legally. But fundamentally, this 4th question gets to the hard issue of, well, how is the school contributing to our larger successful public education system as opposed to just being its own thing? And that one is still kind of in development in some ways. But these are the big picture questions that you as a board trustee, when you're contemplating the big picture decision on these high stakes decisions, you ought to be able to answer these questions to your satisfaction with the help of your professional staff. This is sort of the basic timeline that maps it out. So the charter submits a renewal petition. The thing that triggers that is a signed certification that it's complete. And that from that point on, there's 60 days from submitting it until when you hold a public hearing to discuss it. And then 90 days later is when you hold your decision hearing. Now there's some caveats there. You can request an additional 30 days, but that's kind of the default. You have to post your findings and recommendations 15 days prior to the decision hearing. So the premise there is, you're not going to blindside the school, particularly if there's a recommendation for denial, that they want a chance to be able to marshal their own information and counter it and say, this is why we think the recommendation or the findings are incorrect. This is what we think they failed to consider. So it's to give them a fair shake and enough time to process it. If there is a denial, you have to appeal that within 30 days, and you submit to the petition. Now, this is if it happened at a district, it would be at the district level, and they would submit that petition to the district and the county at the same time. That way, the district gets a chance to see, well, this is the basis of their appeal when they go before the county. Now, if that petition that they submit to you is materially different from the one that they submitted to the district, the idea is, well, no, this is not the same petition. That's not fair. The district didn't get a chance to review that one. If you've improved it all in front of the county, that's not how it's supposed to work. So you at the county level have a responsibility to remand that back to the district. Say, well, this is how they've changed it. Now you got to take a look at it so that the district has a chance to look at whatever the new thing is.
Tom, let me jump in there for a second because there are times where things do change because there's time that goes by. So, for example, on the financial data, there might be an updated fiscal report. There also could be new state data that actually gets released by the department. So there are times where updates are not only allowed but appropriate. But there's also it still needs to be fundamentally the same charter that was submitted to the district. And so it cannot, as Tom said, be material change. But that often is an area where, well, they made a change. They updated their budget. Yeah, they might have, if it was in fact based on an update of caused by required submission of a new budget or some other aspect.
Yeah, and let me just give an example to piggyback on what Dave said. Uh, a lot of charter schools are advised to consider submitting their petition earlier than they need to for two reasons. One, frankly, they may be anticipating that their next dashboard results won't be as favorable. So they want to get the current results in front of the renewal body. But the other aspect of it, if they do think that there's some danger for non-renewal, the appeals process can be quite lengthy. And if they wait till the very last moment they can, you're running very much into the time when they would have to be preparing for the next year or not. And that's terrible for everybody. So you might get some petitions coming early, and that's why it is possible that you would get another year of dashboard results. And then there's debates over, do you stick with what you submitted or do you change it? And, and a lot of authorizers say, well, I want to base my decision on the most recent information. So there's some different ways in that plays out. The renewals for county board authorized charters. This is the renewal whole thing is under Ed Code 47607. The county board here is the renewing authority. The renewals, like for all, they're performance based. You look at the pupil academic achievement. You do have to break out the subgroups. That's, there's nothing new about that. That goes all the way back to No Child Left Behind. But primarily, the tiers that they're placed in are a function of their results on the state dashboard. If there's, again, I already mentioned if they're in the high tier, there's a presumptive renewals. And Dave will show you a little bit without going to huge detail, but so that you have the slide about how the tiers work, where the colors are, and that kind of thing. We've got some good slides on that you can take away as a written resource. The renewal term is 5 to 7 years based on the performance level, except that low performing charters, I mentioned that presumptively they're non-renewed, but if you find, hey, you know what, there's some really extenuating circumstances here, and they seem to be turning the thing around, and there's some data basis for us to believe that they might succeed in turning around, so we're going to give them another couple of years. But those findings have to show that we think that academic improvement is likely in that situation. And I mentioned at the beginning, DAS schools, dashboard alternative school status, that school, the presumption there is that it will be renewed. Now they have under Ed Code alternative metrics that they, in an ideal world, should have worked out with the authorizer in advance to say, these are the things that we want to be measured on. And so that you're considering the renewal with reference to that. But even there, it's a pretty high bar for non-renewal, and it has to be based on a finding by the board that the closure of the school is actually in the best interest of students. So that's a fairly high bar to actually close a school, just to be aware of that. The presumption really for DAS schools is that they shall be renewed.
Now, let me jump in here for a second, Tom, because the key piece there is that there was that discussion within the first year, within just a few months of a approval of alternative metrics. And frankly, that's pretty complicated. As somebody who's been part of that work, some authorizers don't know what to discuss, and some charters don't have a good idea of, because these are students that are often our most at risk. And sometimes some of the alternative mechanisms are, do you actually get the student in the seat? Are they starting to do work as you try to bring them back from dropout and all? So there's a whole area of work and a discussion. But if you find yourself with a DAS school coming to you, hopefully not next year, maybe a year out, and those those metrics haven't been put in place, there's no time like today or yesterday to have those conversations. There's some excellent resources out there to help you. But one of the questions is, what in fact are those criteria for these schools? Is it clear not only for the authorizer, but has it also been made clear to the school where the authorizer at the end of the day gets to choose, but they do have an obligation to inform. And so I'll leave it at that. Okay. It's back to me for a little bit. We're not going to go in the dashboard. You could have a 1 hour, you could have a 10-hour overview of what the dashboard, but for the purpose of this slide, it's just to show that there are the 3 tiers, and then you have your colors. So you have tiers, you have colors, and if you're a county board member, you've spent more than a little bit of time. Probably, we just looked at some of our results in my last meeting earlier last week. Next slide, please. But what this slide and the next slide are great things to have in your back pocket. These are what we call, the quick sheets. It helps you keep in mind what the 3 tiers are as it relates to renewal, and it gives you the criteria. So first, a high presumptive renewal. They give the number of years, which can be between, but then in the far right column, it talks about how people have got there. How did the school get into a high tier? The second one is the middle tier. There's no default recommendation, unlike presumption renewal or presumption denial. There's the basic one that say you can't deny unless you can actually document it. But then there's the low tier, and it talks about how a school gets into the low tier. So this is a good tool to have in your back pocket. Tom, the next one. And this also helps you put in context. Okay, we have somebody at the high tier. They've got actually an expedited process to go through it. However, as Tom indicated earlier, if there's significant problems, it's not like you can be a high performing school, but growing broke, or in some way also not having the level of fiscal integrity. I would suggest to you, if you in fact are finding yourself in that position, there's needs to be an opportunity to cure. There's a number of things that need to be done, but this is one where, again, our caveat about talking to your legal counsel is a very good place to be on that. The majority of charters are in the middle, and this is a good piece that shows you what the rules are for the middle, and it gives you the different criteria that could be, and the criteria that they have to meet for the tier. And then the low is the presumption of denial. Those we're just putting out there because they're really good summary documents that help you figure out when you need a quick review.
And Dave, if I could just chime in there just to call people's attention to, I mentioned the standard for DOS non-renewal being closures in the best interest of the students. And you notice that standard also applies to the middle tier of schools, which is most of our non-DOS schools as well. So it is,
Yes.
that's also a fairly high standard.
Okay. Now, this one goes into a little bit more of the detail about the other reasons for a non-renewal, regardless of the tier. And so this gives you a little bit more information and the criteria by which you have to document it. So it goes back to the point that Tom just made, but it's important for you to know if there are significant problems, you need to figure out what the homework is so that either it gets corrected to your satisfaction, or you in fact go forward with a non-renewal, or in this case it would be a non-renewal because a new petition. Well, typically this is a discussion because you have data and you have information from the actual operations of a charter for the last 4 to 5 years. Okay. Next slide, Tom. And this goes, well, it's still me. Okay. Questions and answers and getting help. So we're going to stop here and see if there's additional questions. Sarah was brave enough the first time. Who else? If you know all this stuff, I'm very impressed and very, very, very glad. But if you've got questions, please, Greg, please unmute yourself and ask the question. Greg, you've got your hand up, Greg. I just can't hear you.
That mute button is giving him.
Yep. Find that mute button. We all have been in that position.
Okay,
There
there
you
we
are.
go. Okay,
Okay.
good. Yeah, this is actually a situation where we have a high-performing school um, located in a largely Latino district. However, their demographics do not reflect the district. That is, they're fairly middle class, particularly white, with a district that is not so. Um, we've struggled. We've told them before that we are concerned about the demographics. As a high-performing school, that limits our ability to impose any kind of consequences on them. But I'm wondering what you suggest are the alternatives in that kind of situation. We put it in an MOU, we've stressed it before, the demographics remain more or less the same. What kind of alternatives do you think are available under those circumstances?
Greg, that is a tough situation. I mean, it's clear to us from our experience working with charters. My own experience is that the best place to do this work, unfortunately, is right when the charter is initially approved and they have an outreach plan that makes sense for the work you need to get done. Because the law talks about a requirement to have a plan to 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 generally meet the same demographic of the general population of the district. Once you get off on the wrong foot and don't have that, and you say you have waiting lists and all of that, it is and you have sibling preference, it's very, very hard to move them. Not impossible, but it does require a significant effort on their part. So for some of that stuff, I have seen authorizers work through and mandate marketing and outreach programs, make sure that the materials are available in multiple languages, especially that the languages that are most underrepresented, that they actually show their outreach to those communities, and that you measure that progress with them, say on an annual basis. They come before you and talk to you. That's my first thoughts. Tom, do you want to add to that?
Well, I mean, I do think that it's important to highlight, where we had that, I don't know, there would be a denial situation, but there are, the premise in the Ed Code now, that language about serving the community interests and serving all students that want to attend is grounds for an authorizer to take a hard look at a school despite where it is in the performance tier. Because when you think about it, if it's a wildly unrepresentative school, its placement in the high performing tier is could be kind of artificial. And so that gives an authorizer the chance to say, look, we need to have a hard conversation about this. Now, I'm not saying, charge ahead with denial or something like that, but you certainly have leverage as an authorizer to say, look, we want a very robust plan here for recognizing the complexities and difficulties that Dave said. The other one to add is that we don't provide money for transportation for charters, and that's a big challenge when to the extent we still live in pretty highly segregated communities. That may not be anything untoward, but I will, we have seen examples of schools that just were not especially sophisticated about that stuff at the beginning, or the founding group of families were kind of homogenous and they were the ones excited about the school, so they got in first, and now there's sibling preferences. So I'm not saying it's an easy thing, but you as an authorizer do have leverage. It's a very important conversation in Sacramento about charters, and one that goes to the viability of the charter sector. So it's a fair conversation to have.
Yeah. Can I follow up real quickly?
Sure.
Yeah. Yes, we have had the conversation and we've had stressed the criteria. Uh, and what they basically do are very nice about it, and then they basically ignore us. The problem is the lack of leverage. Short of denial is the problem. They do have a preference for siblings, of course, but also for family members of faculty, et cetera, that kind of stuff. Is there any
Yeah.
way we can strip that from them to put some kind of pressure on them? So that's the problem, is that the criteria and the leverage we have is either horrible or nothing. If they
Yeah.
choose to ignore us, especially since they are very popular, obviously with the student body, it's a very elite student body, they're very wealthy, et cetera, et cetera. And as a consequence, our leverage is pretty limited. I just looking for somebody to tell me something else we could do.
Well, I'll just give another example, and this is one, I don't say this lightly because again, there's a lot of reasons why there's extenuating circumstances. But if your sense is they're perfectly happy doing nothing, there is more leverage between the joke goes in authorizing closing your school and a sternly worded letter. And we have seen, and look, it has raised eyebrows. I need to be candid about this. So you absolutely have to talk to a lawyer. But we have seen authorizers who will say, we are going to offer a renewal that's conditioned on some things. And that can be controversial among some other charter lawyers and that kind of thing. But we have seen authorizers do that. Say, we the renewal we're offering is conditioned on your entering an MOU with us. It says you will do these things. And so but that you need to talk to a lawyer about that if your sense really is you're not getting any traction and it calls the viability of the school into question. But you do have more tools than just those two. I mean, we understand that lament among authorizers that there's not many tools in the toolbox. But talk to your legal counsel about it if you're facing a decision like that, because it is important for the validity of the sector that we take that issue seriously.
And just to further make it complicated, Greg, is that how we typically deal with this stuff. There are schools that focus on certain populations. Fortune School of Education, one that I'm very familiar with, works very hard in closing the achievement gap for African American students and traditionally boys, but for all. And one has to be careful about we can't have quotas. But I do think, as Tom said, that conversation is one that's difficult. We at CCAP are also involved in some of the discussions about how to improve the quality of our law, and this is an issue that has active conversations in Sacramento, and I think we all need to stay in tune with that as we go forward. So I'll throw that out there, and Greg, I'll give you a chance to respond if you want, but let's go to Abel first. Abel?
Thanks. That's enough.
Okay, thank you, Greg.
I
Abel.
have, yes, thank you. I have a clarifying question. Can we mandate or require lottery preferences? And if we can, what have others done to have a more diverse student body?
I would say, and I don't mean to be weasel out of it by say talk to your school counsel, talk to your legal counsel, but I would on that. I just let me offer up a general proposition, and then Dave, you can chime in. I I think in general, the nature of the sort of things that an authorizer would say, we want you to do this, and this is going to be in our MRU, are things like submit your plan for how you're going to tackle this issue. So authorizers typically, with big picture things like this, kind of avoid dictating exactly what steps you want a school to take, because that's not the nature of the authorizing charter school relationship, to dictate in the weeds, thou shalt do these exact certain things. Now, no, there's going to be some very exceptional like legal thing where yes, they have to comply with some legal things, but where it's a case like this where it's not a matter of you failed to comply with this specific thing in the law, you would generally approach it like, we would expect you to look at a plan that would address these sorts of things. Where's the recruiting happening? Is the language, are the languages, is information available to the languages? Are you able to meet parents where they are? Is our website welcoming? There's things you can say that sort of provide the elements of things you would like their plan on versus saying, here is your plan, because that's not what an authorizer does. Dave, you want to expound upon that? Any thoughts?
Well, the only thing I would add is that I'm aware of at least one, if not two, legal challenges that are going on. There's a complaint, I think, against the Santa Clara County Office of Education being reviewed by the U.S. Department of Education regarding the approval of BOLUS. And I also think there's one related to a renewal where conditions were imposed in Oakland. So in some senses, um, the judicial process or the quasi-judicial process is moving, and we need to watch that and see what that comes. But I also believe there's an opportunity to have these conversations in Sacramento at the time. So Tom's point about caution, um, and I'm about to talk about relationships. It maybe ties together, but it's this is an area where it is fraught and there aren't a lot of tools, nor is there a clear understanding of what the rules are. Sorry.
But let me tie those two things together, though, that Dave just mentioned. One is there are judicial processes sorting these things out, and there are discussions happening in Sacramento. And I think those interrelate in the sense that, you know, as an authorizer, nobody wants to be a test case. Nobody wants to get sued. I mean, right? That's, nobody wants that situation. There is a small set of issues where it's important enough that you arguably make the decision that, we're going to do what we think is right. And if we get sued, we may lose. And you got to be very clear with your counsel about what the risks are in that to you. But the other thing is, if you took what you thought was a high ground and the system doesn't support in its current configuration doing that, that's a policy issue that Sacramento is likely to pay attention to and say, look, authorizers are trying to address this thing and their hands are tied. Maybe we need to do something about that. And we're seeing that on the fiscal side with the things that came out of the A3 sort of thing. Like, hey, people were saying something's not right here, but there were ways in which the system didn't support that. What do we do about it?
Yeah. I also see there's a question from Laura in the chat. Um, you state that county office is not judging the district's decision, but it seems exactly like that is what's being asked to do with an appeal. Please elaborate. Well, I would suggest it's similar to, in one sense, inter-district transfer, where you, in fact, are making a judgment on the merits of the situation, and you may apply the law or the law differently than the district does. It's much more complicated for a charter because there's much more information. So somebody might be making an assessment at the district level that the educational program isn't sufficient. Um, your professional staff may come to a different conclusion, um, and a lot of nuances along the way. So the legal standard that I think I want to reiterate is it's called a de novo standard. It is not to look at theirs and say they were insufficient or sufficient, but it's in fact to do your own review, your own investigation, and that way it helps differentiate it from, oh, we're judging you. Now, there's always the back and forth. The one slide we talked about that on an appeal, the relationship both with staff and with boards can get difficult at times because you these are your colleagues. You work together on every so many things, but once in a while, the position of the county and the county board might be different than the district. Laura, you got a further follow up on that? Any further?
Actually, can I just chime in, Dave? Because
Sure.
I think it's possible that maybe we muddied the waters a little bit when we had the question about, what's your record, your findings on which you based your decision and that kind of thing. And so maybe one way to distinguish it is this. Uh, when we were talking about what your record is of your decision and your findings and the basis for your decision, we were talking about if the district were to deny a renewal, and then at the county level, you also deny that renewal, it goes up to the State Board of Education if they choose to appeal it. And the state board used to make its own independent decision like you do at the county level. And if the state board said, we think it's a good school, they owned it. They were the authorizer. They're now with AB 1505, they're getting out of the business. And their review is just mostly it's like, was it procedurally fair? And that's where you really need to make sure that you're dotting your T's and dotting your I's and crossing your T's in terms of the process if you were in a denial situation, because that's the basis. But in that case, because the state board is reviewing the process, it needs the record of how the decision was arrived at, what the findings were, that kind of thing. At your level, you're looking at the petition as if it was submitted to you directly. You're not looking at what was the district's report, what were the district's recommendations, what was the district process, because you're really looking at the petition itself. And if that helps just to distinguish between the two, I hope that kind of makes it a little clearer.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Okay, other questions? Okay, Tom's getting me moving. So this was a great setup for this conversation because it's all about relationships. Some of the challenges that we've already talked about, it's a relationship that you have with your fellow trustees. Have we had our conversations? Do we in general have a good relationship? And then on this issue, have we already figured out our basic approach, our stance? The relationship between your superintendent and his team and your board, because if it isn't in place and you haven't got these things figured out, it could make for a rockier renewal process than if you in fact had those pieces. The relationships with the authorized schools, do you know who they are? Have they ever come and said hello to you in terms of an update to the board, or what type of relationship fits there? Then your ongoing question that we all have, I think, as county board members, is what's our relationship with the districts in our county? How often do we talk with them? How often do we interact with them? Those are all important things. And then your relationship, if any, with the district authorized charter schools in the county. It's very common for county offices to provide services for every school in their county. Professional development, the C&I committee often is a very active place, and charters are often fully engaged there. So maybe you do have some very good tie-ins and all that. But that goes back to the fact that if you have a high quality relationship, it's a lot easier to look them in the eye if there's an issue and say, hey, for us to be comfortable, we need X. That's part of our evaluation process. That's part of what we think is what the law says. And we also think it's the right thing in terms of how we treat students and how we value our communities. But I just want to emphasize that at the end of the day, almost all the work we always do, whether it be charter or other ways, is in the end about relationships. Tom, you want to add anything?
No, I think you said it just right, Dave.
Then it's back to you.
All right. Well, I promised that I would point you to some resources, and I know that Debbie has some things to share with you as well after that. But just again, with the caveat that obviously when we're creating models and tools and resources, mostly they're there to support your staff to do the work. But in case, they're useful, this is where you can find our overall resources. We have a lot of toolkits that help people do this. We've got that resource that I mentioned about the sort of the initial planning document for your renewals. There's a lot of grabbing some of the very nuts and bolts, like how do I do a site visit and those sorts of things. There's a wealth of things there, including from sources other than CCAP. We have examples from other authorizers in the state, other counties, even some models that are from other states. Oops, what happened here? Uh, so that's there for you. I did want to mention, I think I mentioned Cassie before. That's the Charter Authorizer Support Initiative. That is, you can find it on the CDE's website if you just search up Cassie. They have their own website where they have lots and lots of trainings. Oops, it keeps doing that on me. They have lots and lots of trainings there that they like this one where they've just recorded it and they've put it up there. They've put accompanying resources with it on all kinds of topics. Those are mostly, yes, for authorizing staff, but there are always some board members there, and there are some charter school folks there too. So if you want to, they have, for example, a monthly 1 hour charter chat on the last Wednesday of the month, where it's just a very quick, here's what's going on in charter world. Here's some things you might be thinking about. Then there's breakouts where you can have discussions like we've been having here. And a lot of people find that very valuable. And so I would commend that to you if you have, if you are a trustee who has a lot of charter action, or you're wanting to get up to speed on things. That's a good, easy, and you can, if you need to multitask and have it on in the background and tune into things you need, people find it helpful. I know we mentioned Sarah before. She's often in on those things and finds them very helpful. So, and the last thing is like, here's where you can find our contact information. We had to go without Joe today, but he's always available to answer questions and is a really knowledgeable guy. You can find our website where we have all kinds of things, including the information I mentioned on our conference and everything else. So, with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn things back over to Debbie.
Thank you so much, Tom. So just real quick, I want to, hopefully you can see my screen
We're
here.
good.
Great. I just put in the chat a link to a very short survey form. We would really appreciate your input both on this session, but also future trainings that would be of interest. Just today, we were working on our schedule for the next 6 months of training, and we literally pulled the feedback that we have gotten from this survey from some of the other sessions we have done to start building out that content. So these are suggestions and feedback that we are using. And our program planning committee is meeting again tomorrow morning. And so super helpful to us if you'll take a minute and let us know what kinds of trainings that you would like to have to help you in your role of building trustee excellence as being a County Board of Education member. Up here on the slide, I've put some upcoming events that we have going. ACCBE is going to be a year old in January. So we are having a reflection and anniversary with our plans for 2026 at the end of the month. We also have a county board president networking learning. I was just working with our speakers earlier today, Juliana Ferrari and Bev Gerard, on that seminar for January 22nd. And then CCEE is looking for feedback from the public, all aspects of folks working in education, on the learning portrait that they are putting out. And this will be going in March to the State Board of Education. And so they're workshopping this around to get input from folks. So we've been providing updates on this in our newsletter. And if you can't make any of their sessions, you can fill out their survey online. So really encourage you to participate in that because they are actively seeking input. And we are rolling out 3 in-person events, our first annual conferences for ACCBE. We're going to be in Modesto, Stanislaus County Office of Education and Board of Education are sponsoring us at their events center February 20 and 21. So we're going to have a full day of training and our registration link will be going live soon. In Southern California, we're still working on dates. We're looking at mid-April, and then Northern California, May 16 and 17 will be in Ukiah at the Mendocino County Office of Education that is also co-sponsoring us. So some dates to mark in your calendar. And again, if you please take a moment to fill out the survey. This session has been recorded. Take us a few days to get it recorded and posted up on our website. And once the webmaster has it posted, we will send out an email with links to the recording as well as the slide materials to everyone who registered. So for folks that, for whatever reason, couldn't make it last minute tonight, everyone will have access. And these recordings and slides from all of our trainings are posted on our website. Simply go to the events tab. You'll see a past events, and then they're all organized there by date. So feel free to avail yourself of any of those past trainings that we have had. So with that, thank you for the opportunity to update you on things going on at ACCBE. Turn it back to David and Tom real quick for a final goodbye.
Well, thank you, Debbie. Thank you, ACCBE. And for those of you who may be watching this at a future time and not with us today, we hope that you enjoyed it. And if there's anything that CCAP can do to support your work in authorizing in that part of your role, we're certainly here at your disposal. Dave, you're the double hat wearer here, so I'll leave it to you.
All I've got to add is happy holidays and looking forward to a very powerful 2026.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.